Hello and welcome to another session of Karen's Colours. I'm Dr. Karen and these are my colour conversations. I'm coming to you today from a rather cold, wet and blustery winter's day here in what normally is sunny Queensland in Australia. Well, winter will be over soon. In this session, I'm going to be looking at the personality that's created by the colour brown. I hadn't originally intended to do the brown personality at this stage of the proceedings. In fact, I'd decided to leave it to the very end. But as I explained in the video that I did previously called Brown, Resilient and Predictable, the link will be in the notes below, this colour happened to come up as an issue that I want to present later on down the track. So, hence, the colour analysis has been done and now we're going to analyse the brown personality. But before we begin, once again, welcome to all of my wonderful subscribers. I'm actually up to 36 now. I'm feeling rather chuffed about that. If you're new here and you find this an intriguing channel to follow, then please also subscribe if you're so inclined. It's free and you might just find something here that you've never heard of anywhere else. All right, let's get stuck into the brown personality. Brown is a most intriguing colour for a personality type, but it's also extremely common. So let's examine it in some detail. An overview of what we're looking at today begins with a structure of brown in language, and then we look at the emergence of brown as a basic colour term, followed by the different types of brown and how it then forms part of a personality development. The colour mixture and the type of brown personality is looked at in more detail, as are the stress response outcomes from someone with a brown personality. And finally, we examine the analysis of brown in everyday life. If we look at the emergent brown in a personality, we go back to our little mannequin that we've been dealing with throughout this entire series. To begin with, we have black and white. This is the tendency to extroversion and introversion that occurs in all infants as they begin to take note of their environments. This is the basic orientation for your entire personality that comes afterwards. There is a video on this in very early on, and I will put that in the description below because it does underpin a lot of what I'll be talking about today. The next colour that occurs in a personality development is red, which is all about survival and power. This is when the infant begins to note that there is something outside of itself that it can manipulate. Yellow is about learning and experience, which occurs primarily as the child begins to experience other people and other people's desires and needs and demands. And then we have green, which accompanies yellow because it is the development of values. After that, we have blue, which is all about shared meanings. And because I skipped brown at that stage, which is normally the next colour that occurs in language development, we then go to orange, which is all about social skills, grey, which is about modesty and conformity, purple, which involves creativity and passion. And for today, we will be examining brown, which is all about the links between the mind, that is what we can think, and the body, that is what we can do. To begin with, brown as a basic colour term arises from a history of its recognition in various different terms. And the video that I made previously called Brown, Resilient and Predictable, the link for which will be down in the description below, gives an insight into just how the colour brown has become important in our language. Brown is fairly common in nature. It's the most common human colour, in fact, in terms of eye colour, hair colour, and also skin colour. You could say it was ubiquitous. It is everywhere. It's not favoured as a word by children learning colour terms, along with the colour grey, because it seems to be one that is not particularly favoured by adults. So it's not one that is pointed to. But a lot of childhood language development in terms of how one recognises a colour term has to do with parental interests as well. Its recognition, of course, like with all other colours, precedes its adoption into language, and brown is no different here, although it does tend to have a delay in Western language. There are links between colour preference, linguistic input, in other words, how the child is talked or how the particular colour is talked about with the child, and developing colour cognition, that is recognition of colours and discrimination of one from the other. So all of those will link to how quickly and how effectively the colour brown is incorporated into a child's vocabulary. Brown as a category is all about its station in everyday life. It's a fairly insular colour. It belongs all on its own, and it doesn't seem to have any complementary colour. There is no actual opposite to the colour brown. But because it is also the closest colour to orange, and in fact dark oranges become very much brown in appearance, its best contrast is with the colour cyan. Orange's true opposite or complement is blue, and a dark orange would need to have a complement of a light blue, and cyan is the closest colour that we have that admits to that particular sphere. Brown is also associated very closely with earth and nature. It is, as a colour, it combines both a primary and its complementary secondary colour, and it produces an amalgam of colour characteristics that come from whichever of those primary and complementary secondary colours are the makeup of a particular type of brown. So the tones link to the colours in the mixture of any specific brown. Now, the development of brown as a personality comes in late childhood. It's all about the development of ambitions and goals. The child is able to create goals for itself, to create particular aims that it has. And this is tied to a desire to emulate others. The child sees people doing things and so wants to try those out for itself. It encourages resilience, and it also encourages practice. The child learns that by repetition, by doing things over and over again, it can actually develop particular skills. And that, of course, means that it is associated with determinative play. So, for example, if we have a child who is using a Lego set or building blocks, it will create something very specific as a result of the determination that it has to make something out of the component parts that it has to play with. There is a recognition of potentials within a child who is developing a brown personality. There is a search for specific outcomes. The child wants to achieve something, and so therefore it will go ahead and learn whatever it needs to or repeat the skills that are necessary in order to obtain those specific outcomes. There are creations of plans and strategies that occur, and the older the child is, the more complex those plans and strategies appear to be. This, in turn, produces a stable personality. There is a determination to succeed in whatever a child wants to succeed in, and this is linked to a studious discipline. The child learns by repetition and by persevering with a particular skill set. By adolescence, the validation of the brown mindset is well and truly established. There is an emerging novel skill set. The child or the adolescent may by now have developed a particular set of skills that are different from those of its peers. It's testing the effects of its actions. And often this comes as a result of some fairly conservative methodology. The accomplishments that the child or the adolescent develops are all about enhancing their own self-presentation. This is who I am because this is what I can do, is the sort of mindset that comes out of this adolescent Brown personality. The linking of ideas with practice is also associated with wish fulfillment. The adolescent wants to achieve something, and so it thinks about what needs to be done and then works out how to go about and do those things. And that, of course, determines a fair degree of mental and physical flexibility. The child or the adolescent becomes very creative and innovative in its approaches to specific skills. Practical thinking and application, of course, are tied together. Because of the complexity of the Brown personality, the stress responses need to be attempted in a slightly different way when we are establishing what they are and discussing them. They have both positive and negative variants. And the interesting thing about the Brown stress responses is that those that are seen as positive can also be seen as negative, depending upon the circumstances in which they arise. So therefore, Brown as fight is all about resistance to change, which can be everything from being assured that you can do the same thing over and over again and get the same results, but at the same time also prevents the person from doing something new. And so therefore there is a repetition that occurs that may or may not be successful in its outcomes. In terms of fawning, there is a tendency to be pliable. In terms of flight, the tendency is to have a rejection of current trends and new innovative ways of doing things. Although Brown itself can be an innovative personality, it doesn't tend to follow trends. It tends to create its own trends. And finally, Brown as freeze is about avoiding the spotlight, but also it can be about hiding away their own motivations, desires, and actions. So let's have a look at these in terms of the different colour combinations that make up the Brown personality. Firstly, the most common colours that are associated with the development of Brown are red and green. And in order to form a personality from these two colours, we have to acknowledge that red is all about action and risk-taking. Green, on the other hand, is all about trying something new or different. And so when we combine these two, we have a particular way of creating a Brown personality. So how does that work? Well, if we look at the resistance to change, which comes from the fight, the tendency to be pliable, which is fawn, the rejection of trends, which is all about flight, and avoidance of the spotlight, which is all about freezing, then Brown as a green-red presentation has both positive and negative attributes as follows. In terms of resistance to change, the positive attributes are being strong, protective, and productive in what it is that is accomplished. On the other hand, the negative attributes are all about being stiff, unyielding, and uncommitted to any specific course of action. In terms of fawn, the tendency to be pliable can be positively warm, friendly, and considerate, but on the negative view, they are about changeability, being distractible, and also being a procrastinator. In terms of flight, the rejection of trends as a positive thing is about being loyal, principled, and rule-abiding. So you're not prepared to do something different. You are prepared to stick with what is known. On the other hand, the negative attributes are all about stubbornness, being insular, and also being both bored and boring in the way in which you carry out your activities. Avoiding the spotlight is the freeze component of those stress responses. And in a positive aspect, this is all about being organized, watchful, and to some extent being shy. On the other hand, the negative attributes are all about being disengaged, unreliable, and fairly solitary in your activities. So, if the brown is, instead of being made of red and green, is a composite of blue and orange, we have a slightly different way of doing brown. Blue is about organization and planning, whereas orange is about responding to the unexpected. So how does this play out? Once again, looking at those 4 stress reactions, in resistance to change, the aspect that is positive is all about being stable, determined, and also reserved in the person's approach to activities. The negative aspect's about being strict, uncompromising, and demanding. In terms of the tendency to be pliable, there is an insightfulness, an appreciativeness, and also a flexibility in the approach to actions. The negative aspects are being unreliable, lacking in resilience, and also having a defeatist attitude towards the things that are to be accomplished. In terms of rejection of trends, the positive ideas are all about practicality, being conventional, and also straightforward and honest in the way in which you approach things, whereas the negative is all about boringness, unambitiousness, and being fairly unadventurous in your approach. When one avoids the spotlight as a blue, orange, brown, then the positive aspects about supportiveness, being honest, and also humble, whereas the negative are all about being underhanded, impatient, and very sneaky in the way in which things are done. The third method of creating brown is using yellow and purple as the combination. And yellow is all about knowledge and expectancy. It's what you have learnt and what you expect to be the outcomes of those learnings. The purple is all about imagination and a certain degree of playfulness. So how does this present as a personality type? Again, resistance to change has both positive and negative attributes. The positive ones are being trustworthy, dependable, and also fairly grounded in the way in which you approach actions. The negative is artificiality, defiance, and being uninspired and also uninspiring. These sort of people do not become good leaders. There is a tendency to be pliable that is positive, which involves inventiveness, resourcefulness, and also being clever in the way that you organize your life and the things that you do. On the other hand, the negative aspects are overreaching, being unpredictable, and also insincere in actions and reactions to others and their needs and desires. A rejection of trends in the positive aspect is all about resilience, security, and being stalwart. In other words, faithful, strong, and prepared to stick to your principles. In terms of negativity, there is argumentativeness, pretentiousness, and a fair degree of scattered thinking, but also scattered actions. In terms of the freeze attributes, that avoidance of the spotlight, the positive aspects are being studious, hardworking, and comforting in your approach, whereas the negative aspects are all about being reticent to be involved, having a fair degree of insecurity, and also being timid, although not all 3 of those are necessarily compatible. So this gives us an overall view of the sort of brown personality traits that exist. Positive ones are things such as being strong, considerate, loyal, organized, stable, appreciative, practical, honest, trustworthy, inventive, humble, and resilient. The negative ones are all about being stiff and distractible and stubborn and disengaged and strict, unreliable, boring, underhanded, uninspired, self-centered, insecure, and unambitious. When this has turned into an adult personality, we can examine this according to the way that we examine all of the other adult personalities by looking at Brown as a strength, where we have a conscious position, that is the activities that are carried out, and an unconscious drive, which are the motivations for those activities. As an obstacle, Brown presents itself as a problem behavior as a result of some sort of unrequited needs. And when Brown occurs as a current challenge, then it can be a psychological stressor, which in turn creates a physical reaction. As a strength, Brown's overview is all about being stubborn, dependable, and practical. Historically, a Brown personality has had a fairly conventional childhood. But it's also had a concentration on self-actualization. The child has been encouraged to work things out for itself and to learn to fend for itself. The current situation for someone who has Brown as a strength is that they are ambitious, organized, and determined to succeed in whatever they have decided they want. They're fairly intolerant of indolence. So if you have a lazy person in your environment and you are a strong Brown personality, then you're going to let that person know exactly where they stand and where you stand in relation to them. They appreciate home comforts, however, so that once the work is done, they don't expect to be interrupted for more work. As an obstacle, Brown is slightly different. In terms of overview, they are boring, they're uninspired, and they avoid whatever it is that is necessary to achieve something in life. In other words, they avoid work. Historically, they've had little opportunity to practice any sorts of skills because things have been done for them. And they find themselves later on unable to express their desires or feelings in any way other than being fairly autocratic and demanding. Currently, people who have Brown as an obstacle are lacking in vision and imagination. But in reality, even though they may appear to have particular goals in mind, they are unambitious and impractical because they don't actually follow through. And there is a tendency towards self-centeredness. It's all about them and their needs and very little to do with anybody else's needs or desires. If Brown is the current challenge in the now, then the person is facing challenges to their goals. As a positive response to that, they will go out and acquire some new practical skills. As a negative response, they become stubborn and very resistant to any sort of options or ideas that might allow them to enhance their own skill set. They could be experiencing stagnation. The positive response to that would be the revision of their aims and ambitions and setting some that are more realistic, whereas the negative aspects are all about redirecting blame for failure onto other things and other people. There are always potential health issues that are signaled by Brown as a current challenge, and these are associated with work. So repetitive strain injuries, for example, or bone and joint disintegration, which, while not necessarily present in a young adult, certainly present themselves in older age. And along with that bone and joint disintegration, there is some form of cognitive decline. That cognitive decline comes from the negative aspects of the Brown personality, the resistance to change, the sameness of every day, the same repetitive actions and ways of thinking will eventually lead to a cognitive shutdown. So, in summary, Brown as a basic color term has no complementary color. It is, in fact, a composite color of complementary opposites. And as a personality, it is fairly wide-ranging. The personality, of course, depends on which of those composite colors are the predominant ones in that brown makeup. And as a strength, it denotes the ability to indulge in practical skills. As an obstacle, it's all about resisting change. And in the now, as a challenge, it indicates a focus on the self and the self's needs and abilities. Brown health issues are all about physical and cognitive decline, and these are developed over a long period of time. And that brings us to an end on the overview of the Brown personality. It's a very complex one, and one that needs to be explored in much more detail than I have presented here. But as we go through the various different personality types later on in this series, where I look at the personalities of brown associated with other colors, we'll develop some more ideas regarding just how it influences behavior. In the meantime, if you're one of those people who is a brown personality, I certainly hope that you've taken on most of the positive attributes and are enjoying being the self-actualizing, competent and practical person that enables you to get along in life, because the ambitions that you create are all able to be fulfilled through your own skills and experience. Certainly, if you aren't a brown personality but would like to be one, well, there are quite a few ideas in this presentation that you might like to follow. In the meantime, may the colours of your life bring you the joy and happiness that you desire. And until next time, look after yourself. Bye.